This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. Happy Father's Day to those listening in North America, and happy Sunday to all those listening live across the world on terrestrial radio and the internet on this network, powered by the people, WBN 324. You can find out everything about this network by visiting linktree.com/WBN 324. A special nod to my mothership, Last Scout Radio. You can find them at lastscoutradio.com. And by way of introduction, for those of you who don't know me and for the new affiliate stations, my name is BACFA. I was raised on radio and sugar cereal in the deep south of the United States. I've spent my life as a technologist and leader. I've traveled around the world a bit, mostly throughout the United States, in the Caribbean, South Pacific, and Australia. I'm hoping to do a European tour someday soon. I love the ocean and have taken up residence on the Emerald Coast of Florida, the world's most beautiful beaches. I trade time between peaches and beaches, meaning I live in both Florida and Georgia while I work in both places, enjoying travel between those two home bases. I'm a student of people, of media, was part of the Great Awakening in these last years, and hope to continue to provide some insight into world events. This show, Atomic Biscuits, was born out of the need to do a news review for the week in a way that does not focus on the top trending stories per se, but often the things that are tucked just out of sight, and then focus in on what those items mean to people like you and me. I'm a conservative, but I am open-minded. I respect that people have unique journeys and viewpoints based on experience. I revel in hearing the other sides, crossing swords with people where we disagree, and embracing them where we find common ground. You'll find I will encourage you to go looking for some answers on your own. This is a terrestrial radio show, and as much as we promote an environment of non-censorship, not all regulators will approve or agree with the topics of conversation, so I may talk around a topic, point you towards something, and continue on. It's how we've managed to stay on the air all this time. You can talk back to me on Gab. You'll find my account there under BACFA, which stands for Bread and Circuses for America, and there are links to all the historical shows and show notes there, so you can catch up if you're not able to listen live on WBN 324 after Sunday Long Live each week. And with that introduction, let's just get on to the show here. I wanted to talk a little bit about propaganda and mainly about China. There's been some interesting focus on China over the past week. The first article I wanted to talk about was out at semaphore.com. Now, this website has a very specific audience. It might be worth your time to dig around a little and discover who runs Semaphore, who funds Semaphore, and why they cover the stories that they do. With that context, sometimes their stories take on additional dimension. Well, this story is just titled How China Wins in the New Propaganda War. American influencers are flooding China to show off its technology and culture, while the U.S. has expelled the world's most followed TikToker. A new Chinese initiative will pay for U.S. influencers to visit and collaborate with local counterparts, according to Chinese state media, which said the program would boost cultural exchange. It's an investment in soft power and a propaganda coup. State outlets praised recent visits from Western influencers like iShowSpeed, whose 6-hour YouTube video on his Shenzhen visit has nearly 9 million views, for showcasing authentic life in China, Bloomberg wrote. The U.S.'s immigration crackdown, meanwhile, is pushing out influencers. The Italian citizen Katie Lame, the world's most popular TikToker, was recently detained by U.S. authorities and left the country after being reported by a rival influencer who is friends with President Donald Trump's son, Barron. That is pretty brief, if I do say so myself, if you can call that an article. There are a couple of links here to other things, but I think it's just really scratching something, not even scratching the thing. It's an acknowledgement that an exchange of ideas in and of itself can be toxic. It's like a mosquito. That mosquito's just sucking your blood when he lands on you, except the nose of that thing might have some germs on it. It might be carrying something quite deadly, and then when it sticks its nose into you to siphon up your blood, you wind up with something that you didn't expect. Not just a mosquito bite, but dengue fever or something crazy. So we have to consider that sometimes any contact might be dangerous. And it reminded me of this story I wanted to share with you, how Google took on China and lost. And this is an older story from December of 2018 from MIT Technology Review. How Google took on China and lost. It used to be that while Google wanted China, China really needed Google. Not anymore. Google's first foray into Chinese markets was a short-lived experiment. Google China's search engine was launched in 2006 and abruptly pulled from mainland China in 2010 amid a major hack of the company and disputes over censorship of search results. But in August of 2018, the investigative journalism website The Intercept reported, and there's a link here, that the company was working on a secret prototype of a new Chinese censored search engine called Project Dragonfly. Amid a furor from human rights activists and some Google employees, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence called on the company to kill Dragonfly, saying it would strengthen Communist Party censorship and compromise the privacy of Chinese customers. In mid-December, The Intercept reported that Google had suspended its development efforts in response to complaints from the company's own privacy team, who learned about the project from the investigative website's reporting. Observers talk as if the decision about whether to re-enter the world's largest market is up to Google. Will it compromise its principles and censor search the way China wants? This misses the point. This time, the Chinese government will make the decisions. Google and China have been locked in an awkward tango for over a decade, constantly grappling over who leads and who follows. Charting that dance over the years reveals major shifts in China's relationship with Google and all of Silicon Valley. To understand whether China will let Google back in, we must understand how Google and China got here, what incentives each party faces, and how artificial intelligence might have both of them dancing to a new tune. When www.google.cn launched in 2006, the company had gone public only 2 years before. iPhone did not yet exist, nor did any Android-based smartphones. Google was about 1/5 as large and valuable as it is today, and the Chinese internet was seen as a backwater of knockoff products that were devoid of innovation. Google's Chinese search engine represented the most controversial experiment to date in internet diplomacy. To get into China, the young company had to define itself by its motto. That company that had defined itself by the motto, "Don't be evil," agreed to censor the search results shown to Chinese users. Central to that decision by Google leadership was a bet that by serving the market, even with a censored product, they could broaden the horizons of Chinese users and nudge the Chinese internet toward greater openness. At first, Google appeared to be succeeding in that mission. When Chinese users searched for content on google.cn, they noticed that some results had been removed. The public acknowledgement of internet censorship was a first among Chinese search engines, and it wasn't popular with regulators. The Chinese government hated it, says Kaiser Kuo, former head of international communications for Baidu. They compared it to coming to my house for dinner and saying, "I will agree to eat the food, but I don't like it." Google hadn't asked the government for permission before implementing this notice, but wasn't ordered to remove it from the search results. The company's Global prestige and technical expertise gave it leverage. China might be a promising market, but it was still dependent on Silicon Valley for talent, funding, and knowledge. Google wanted to be in China, the thinking went, but China needed Google. Google's censorship disclaimer was a modest victory for transparency. Baidu and other search engines in China soon followed suit. Over the next 4 years, Google China fought skirmishes on multiple fronts with the Chinese government over content restrictions, with local competitor Baidu over the quality of search results, and with its own corporate leadership in Mountain View, California, over the freedom to adapt global products for local needs. By late 2009, Google controlled more than a third of the Chinese search market, a respectable share, but well below Baidu's 58%, according to data from Analysis International. In the end, though, it wasn't censorship or competition that drove Google out of China. It was a far-reaching hacking attack known as Operation Aurora that targeted everything from Google's intellectual property to the Gmail accounts of Chinese human rights activists. The attack, which Google said came from within China, pushed company leadership over the edge. On January 12, 2010, Google announced, "We have decided we are no longer willing to continue censoring our results on Google.cn, and so over the next few weeks we will be discussing with the Chinese government the basis on which we could operate an unfiltered search engine within the law, if at all." The sudden reversal blindsided Chinese officials. Most Chinese internet users could go about their online lives with few reminders of government controls, but the Google announcement shoved cyber attacks and censorship into the spotlight. The world's top internet company and the government of the most populous country were now engaged in a public showdown. Chinese officials were really on their back foot, and it looked like they might cave and make some kind of accommodation, says Kuo. All of these people, who apparently did not give much of a damn about internet censorship before, were really angry about it. The whole internet was abuzz with this. But officials refused to cede ground. China welcomes international internet businesses developing services in China according to the law, a foreign ministry spokesperson told Reuters at the time. Government control of information was and remains central to Chinese Communist Party doctrine. 6 months earlier, following riots in Xinjiang, the government had blocked Facebook, Twitter, and Google's YouTube in one fell swoop. Fortifying the Great Wall, the government was making a bet. China and its technology sector did not need Google search to succeed. Google soon abandoned Google.cn, retreating to a Hong Kong-based search engine. In response, the Chinese government decided not to fully block services like Gmail and Google Maps, and for a while it allowed sporadic access from the mainland to the Hong Kong search engine too. The two sides settled in a tense stalemate. Google's leaders seemed prepared to wait it out. I personally believe that you cannot build a modern knowledge society with that kind of censorship, Google chairman Eric Schmidt told Foreign Policy in 2012. In a long enough time period, I think that this kind of regime approach will end? I think absolutely. The role of languishing under censorship, the Chinese internet sector boomed. Between 2010 and 2015, there was an explosion of new products and companies. Xiaomi, a hardware maker now worth over $40 billion, was founded in April 2010, a month earlier. Meituan, a Groupon clone that turned into a juggernaut of online to offline services, was born. It went public in December 2018 and now is worth about $35 billion. Didi, the ride-hailing company that drove Uber out of China and is now challenging it in its international markets, was founded in 2012. Chinese engineers and entrepreneurs returning from Silicon Valley, including many former Googlers, were crucial to this dynamic, bringing world-class technical and entrepreneurial chops to markets insulated from their former employers in the United States. Older companies like Baidu and Alibaba also grew quickly during these years. The Chinese government played contradictory roles in this process. It cracked down on political speech in 2013, imprisoning critics and instituting new laws against spreading rumors online, a 1-2 punch that largely suffocated political discussion on China's once raucous social media sites. Yet it also launched a high-profile campaign promoting mass entrepreneurship and mass innovation. Government-funded startup incubators spread across the country, as did government-backed venture capital. That confluence of forces brought results. Services like Meituan flourished, and so did Tencent's super app WeChat, a digital Swiss Army knife that combines aspects of WhatsApp, PayPal, and dozens of other apps from the West. E-commerce behemoth Alibaba went public on the New York Stock Exchange in September of 2014, selling $25 billion worth of shares, still the most valuable IPO in history. Amidst this homegrown success, the Chinese government decided to break the uneasy truce with Google. In mid-2014, a few months before Alibaba's IPO, the government blocked virtually all Google services in China, including many considered essential for international business, such as Gmail, Google Maps, and Google Scholar. It took us by surprise, and we felt Google was one of those valuable properties that they couldn't afford to block, says Charlie Smith, the pseudonymous co-founder of Great Fire, an organization that tracks and circumvents Chinese internet controls. The Chinese government had pulled off an unexpected hat trick, locking out the Silicon Valley giants, censoring political speech, and still cultivating an internet that was controllable, profitable, and innovative. With the Chinese internet blossoming and the government not backing down, Google began to search for ways back into China. It tried out less politically sensitive products and everything but search strategy, but with mixed success. In 2015, rumors swirled that Google was close to bringing its Google Play App Store back to China, pending Chinese government approval, but the promised App Store never materialized. This was followed by a partnership with Mobvoi, a Chinese smartwatch maker founded by an ex-Google employee, to make voice search available on Android Wear in China. Google later invested in Mobvoi, its first direct investment in China since 2010. In March of 2017, there were reports that authorities would allow Google Scholar back in. They didn't. Reports that Google would launch a mobile app store in China together with NetEase, a Chinese company, similarly came to naught, though Google was permitted to relaunch its smartphone translation app. Then, in May of 2017, a showdown between AlphaGo, the Go playing program built by Google sibling company DeepMind, and KG, the world's #1 human player, was allowed to take place in Wuzhen, a tourist town outside of Shanghai. AlphaGo won all 3 games in the match, a result that the government had perhaps foreseen. Live streaming of the match within China was forbidden, and not only in the form of video. As The Guardian put it, outlets were banned from covering the match live in any way, including text commentary, social media, or push notifications. DeepMind broadcast the match outside of China. During this same period, Chinese censors quietly rolled back some of the openings that Google's earlier China operations had catalyzed. In 2016, Chinese search engines began removing the censorship disclaimers that Google had pioneered. In 2017, the government launched a new crackdown on virtual private networks. VPNs are software widely used for circumventing censorship. Meanwhile, Chinese authorities began rolling out extensive AI-powered surveillance technologies across the country, constructing what some called a 21st century police state in the western region of Xinjiang, home to the country's Muslim Uyghurs. Despite the retrograde climate, Google capped off 2017 with a major announcement: the launch of a new AI research center in Beijing. Google Cloud's Chinese-born chief scientist Fei Li would oversee the new center. "The science of AI has no borders," she wrote in the announcement of the center's launch, "neither do its benefits." Li left Google in September 2018 and returned to Stanford University, where she is a professor. If the research center was a public symbol of Google's continued efforts to gain a foothold in China, Google was also working quietly to accommodate Chinese government restrictions. Dragonfly, the censored search engine prototype which has been demonstrated for Chinese officials, blacklists key search terms. It would be operated as part of a joint venture with an unnamed Chinese partner. The documents The Intercept obtained said the app would still tell users when results had been censored. Other aspects of the project are particularly troubling. Prototypes of the app reportedly link users' searches to their mobile phone number, opening the door to greater surveillance and possibly arrest if people search for banned material. In a speech to the Dragonfly team, later leaked by The Intercept, Ben Gomes, Google's head of search, explained Google's aims. China, he said, is arguably the most interesting market in the world today. Google was not just trying to make money by doing business in China, he said, but was after something bigger. We need to understand what is happening there in order to inspire us, he said. China will teach us things that we don't know. In early December, Google CEO Sundar Pichai told a congressional committee that right now we have no plans to launch in China, though he would not rule out future plans. The question is, if Google wants to come back to China, does China want to let it in? To answer that question, try thinking like an advisor to President Xi Jinping. Bringing Google back certainly has upsides. China's growing number of knowledge workers need access to global news and research, and Baidu is notoriously bad at turning up relevant results from outside China. Google could serve as a valuable partner to Chinese companies looking to expand internationally, as it is demonstrated in a patent-sharing partnership with Tencent and a $550 million investment in e-commerce giant JD. Google's re-entry would also help legitimize the Communist Party's approach to internet governance, a signal that China is an indispensable market and an open one as long as you play by the rules. But from the Chinese government's perspective, these potential upsides are marginal. Chinese citizens who need to access the global internet can still usually do so through VPNs, though it's getting harder. Google doesn't need to have a business in China to help Chinese internet giants gain business abroad, and the giants of Silicon Valley have already ceased their public criticism of Chinese internet censorship and instead extol the country's dynamism and innovation. By contrast, the political risks of permitting Google to return loom large to Xi and his inner circle. Hostility toward both China and Silicon Valley is high and rising in American political circles. A return to China would put Google in a political pressure cooker. What if that pressure, via antitrust action or new legislation, effectively forced the company to choose between the American and Chinese markets? Google's sudden exit in 2010 marked a major loss of face for the Chinese government in front of its own citizens. If Chinese leaders give the green light to Project Dragonfly, they run the risk of that happening again. A savvy advisor would be likely to think that these risks to Xi, to the Communist Party, and to his or her own career outweighed the modest gains to be had from allowing Google's return. The Chinese government oversees a technology sector that is profitable, innovative, and driven largely by domestic companies, an enviable position to be in. Allowing Google back in would only diminish its leverage. Better, then, to stick with the status quo, dangle the prospect of full market access while throwing Silicon Valley companies an occasional bone by permitting peripheral services like translation. Google does have one factor in its favor. If it first entered China during the days of desktop internet and departed at the dawn of the mobile internet, it is now trying to re-enter in the era of AI. The Chinese government places high hopes on AI as an all-purpose tool for economic activity, military power, and social governance, including surveillance. And Google and its Alphabet sibling DeepMind are global leaders in corporate AI research. This is probably why Google has held publicity stunts like the AlphaGo match and the AI-powered Guess the Sketch game on WeChat, as well as taking more substantive steps like establishing the Beijing AI Lab and promoting Chinese use of TensorFlow, an artificial intelligence software library developed by the Google Brain team. Taken together, these efforts constitute a sort of artificial intelligence lobbying strategy designed to sway the Chinese leadership. This pitch, however, faces problems on at least 3 battlegrounds: Beijing, Washington, D.C., and Mountain View, California. Chinese leaders have good reason to feel they're already getting the best of both worlds. They can take advantage of software development tools like TensorFlow, and they still have a prestigious Google Research Lab to train Chinese AI researchers, all without granting Google market access. In Washington, meanwhile, American security officials are annoyed that Google is actively courting a geopolitical rival while refusing to work with the Pentagon on AI projects because its employees object to having their work used for military ends. Those employees are the key to the third battleground. They've demonstrated the ability to mobilize quickly and effectively, as with the protests against U.S. defense contracts and walkout last November over how the company has dealt with sexual harassment. In late November, more than 600 Googlers signed an open letter demanding that the company drop the Dragonfly project, writing, "We object to technologies that aid the powerful in oppressing the vulnerable." Daunting as these challenges sound, and high as the costs of pursuing the Chinese market may be, they haven't entirely deterred Google's top brass. The development of Dragonfly appears to have, at the very least, paused. The wealth and dynamism that make China so attractive to Google also mean the decision of whether or not to do business there is no longer the company's to make. I know people in Silicon Valley are really smart and they're really successful because they can overcome any problem they face, says Bill Bishop, a digital media entrepreneur with experience in both markets. I don't think they've ever faced a problem like the Chinese Communist Party. Again, that's Matt Sheehan over at technologyreview.com. And this, again, is from way back in December of 2018. Now, let's think about what's changed and what hasn't. That's a pretty prescient article to focus on where Google has been and why they have been buddied up with the Chinese Communist Party. What I would hope as an American is that an American-built company like Google would be an advocate for those principles that are founded in the place where they started and what gives them rise. But what we seem to have here is a capitulation on the part of Google to adapt to the localization rules in such a way as to not deliver the freedoms and the knowledge and the gains that we would hope we would export from America, but instead adapt to a very oppressive way of doing business when it suits them. I find that a lot off-putting. I think it's a very sour way to operate. And honestly, I think that we need to think about how multinational companies like this operate. Are they founded in one place, or are they multipolar? Is their alliance with the one that brung them to the dance, or are they courting another at the same time? And how do these two things intersect? How do we know that China is going to play fair? They're never going to play fair. So why would we push them into a position where they have an advantage? Why would we allow them to open up the Pandora's box of knowing what's inside the technology, which they will demand to do so that they can replicate it, so that they can own it? It's very much like the Belt and Road Initiative, where it seems like a friendly, cooperative way of doing business, when actually what you're doing is you're allowing the cancer to be injected into your body so that it can completely take over. It's a slow kill. It's very dangerous. And I think that Google is playing a dangerous game here. There's a couple of possibilities. It's just money. They're just after the market. I kind of don't buy that. There's a lot at stake. It could be an op. I kind of buy that. There is a lot of reasons to believe that there might be a hidden hand here that is puppeting Google into a position so that those networks can be leveraged, a keep your enemies close approach. It also could be that China already has it all. They've already got you, and they don't need you, Google, because they've already taken your IP, and you just don't know it yet. We've heard all the stories about the artificial sun, the robotic helpers for the elderly who will take care of them. And we've seen all the stories about their huge destroyers and railguns and sea power. Is it true? Is it propaganda? Is it positioning? Is it real? I think that time will bear out the truth, but do we have that kind of time? And are we preparing in such a way as to make ourselves ready for the eventualities? We see the guns, we see the talking of war all around the world as if it's that it's inevitable, that there is no stopping it, that it's part of the schedule. We need to ask why that is. Okay, one more China story. Okay, so over at thegatewaypundit.com, they posted this story this week. China eyes secret mega port to bypass Panama Canal and shatter U.S. control over Western Hemisphere trade. This was by Jason Sullivan. If China secures the Copia Port E project, it would turbocharge Beijing's trade in South America, not only enabling Chinamax megaships, but allowing all shipping to completely bypass U.S.-controlled choke points and dominate hemispheric commerce virtually overnight. A geopolitical storm is brewing on the western edge of South America, and the United States cannot afford to look away. At the heart of it lies a deep-water megaport project in Chile's Atacama Desert. Copia Port E, a port so naturally engineered by geography itself that it could become either America's greatest commercial and strategic opportunity or China's most dangerous economic beachhead south of our border. If the Trump administration seizes this moment, the U.S. can ensure that this asset is developed with American interests at the forefront, safeguarding our supply chains, trade routes, and strategic naval positioning. If we hesitate, however, China will not, and they are already moving fast. Copia Port E sits along the Punta Cachos Peninsula directly on the Pacific coast. What makes this location a world rarity, as port experts have described it, is its natural breakwater, extending 8 kilometers into the sea, and its natural seabed depths exceeding 30 meters. No dredging needed. This alone makes it the only location in all of South America capable of receiving Chinamax and Capesize class supertankers, ships that carry 80% more cargo than standard vessels, but cannot pass through either the Panama or Suez canals. Strategically, Copia Port E also sits right at a critical bend of the Pan-American Highway, which provides the shortest and most direct land routes to both southern Brazil and Argentina. This land-sea synergy means the port would serve as a high-efficiency hub for transcontinental trade, connecting the Pacific with the Atlantic faster than any other corridor in South America. This location provides direct land access to Brazil's Atlantic ports, enabling highly efficient distribution of goods to Europe, Africa, and North America. Whomever controls this corridor holds the keys to hemispheric trade dominance. China knows exactly what it's doing through its Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Beijing is now executing an aggressive circumvention strategy. It includes building the port of Chancay in Peru and laying the groundwork for a transoceanic railway from Peru to eastern Brazil. This rail corridor, while ambitious, is limited by port depth and capacity. Chancay's Shallow harbor restricts access to only standard vessels, meaning it can never become a global shipping hub on the scale Copia Port E promises. But imagine if China also secured Copia Port E with its deep waters, vast land holdings, and ability to dominate South American trade routes. That would be game over. China would no longer need the Panama Canal. They could undercut American shipping and establish a naval foothold on the Pacific coast of South America. This is not speculation. It is deliberate, well-documented component of China's long-game global strategy. Worse yet, should China gain full operational control over Copia Port E, it would grant them a potential military beachhead within the Western Hemisphere. The natural harbor's depth could accommodate not just supertankers, but nuclear submarines, aircraft carriers, and warships, posing a potential national security threat just south of America's borders. This is why the Trump administration has already acted decisively on similar fronts. President Trump pushed for Greenland to join the United States, recognizing its untapped value and proximity to Arctic shipping lanes and Russian naval activity. Trump proposed Canada become the 51st state, with a golden dome symbolizing unity and defense, underlining how critical our northern frontier has become. Under Trump's watch, the U.S. began to reclaim influence over the Panama Canal, pushing back against decades of Chinese maneuvering for control. Now the challenge is directly to our south, and the opportunity is clear. If China secures Copia Port E, it won't just be building a port. It will be constructing a new and improved Silk Road right on America's doorstep. With China-Max superfreighters too massive to pass through the Panama or Suez canals, Copia Port E would hand Beijing an unmatched strategic and commercial advantage in the Southern Hemisphere. This isn't just about trade, it's about power. And if the United States fails to act, we may soon find ourselves boxed out of our own hemisphere by a communist adversary that never stops playing the long game. Copia Port E is not just a port, it's a continental gateway, a linchpin in who controls the future of trade, logistics, and influence in the Southern Hemisphere. China sees it, and so must we. And there'll be more there. It comes from Unleashed News. Unleashed.news, but this story is over at thegatewaypundit.com. This week I found out that they're going to do a remake of Matlock. I never really watched Matlock. I was from way back, I was a Raymond Burr watcher as a kid, the black and white stuff with the mysteries and the guy who never lost a case kind of stuff. And I like procedural drama. I've always liked legal drama. What I think would be fantastic is if somebody would write a series based on Senator John Kennedy. This is one of the funniest real-world individuals around. He's got a biting whip sense of humor, and, he can sit there in a seersucker suit and look absolutely unassuming and just cut you down so fast you don't know what happened. He's hilarious, and we need more people like this, kind of the Mark Twains of the world, to just get to the point of the matter and let people wander into their own swamp and then point out that they're just disgusting. This story comes from RedState.com's Sister Told Ya. Weenie, Senator John Kennedy dunks Gavin Newsom's Mad Maxine's LA riot hot takes as only he can. Representative Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, has been making the rounds amid the rioting that has taken place in Los Angeles County, including in parts of her congressional district over the last several days. As per the norm, there has been the predictable gaslighting, histrionics, theatrics, and Republican derangement syndrome that we've come to expect over the years from the entrenched Congresswoman. As Red State reported, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, put on his best Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana persona in a press conference Tuesday when he was asked about Waters' denial of the violence happening during the LA riots. I'm just gonna, in my Southern gentlemanly way, say, bless her heart, to Maxine Waters, Johnson stated as he tried to keep a straight face after the question was asked. I don't even know how to comment on Maxine Waters anymore. It's madness. I'm going to be charitable and leave it right there. But while Kennedy and Johnson are both Republicans, both are from the same great state and are both members of Congress, there can be only one GOP Senator John Kennedy, and that's the one who appeared on Sean Hannity's program Tuesday night. In their back and forth exchange, Kennedy laid out the straight-up facts about the absurdity of the failed Democrat response to the riots, ripping into California Governor Gavin Newsom and LA Mayor Karen Bass, in particular, for their grotesque incompetence in purportedly attempting to manage the crisis. While there, Kennedy, too, put on his best Southern gentlemanly tone of voice in providing some timely advice for Waters and those closest to her. All of this is why the aliens won't talk to us. I mean, I see what you see, what the American people see. I mean no disrespect to Congresswoman Waters, but somebody needs to tell her that the voices in her head are not real. Point two, I've listened to so many of my colleagues and members of the media say that these are mostly peaceful protests. That's like saying that Harvey Weinstein is mostly a feminist because he didn't rape every woman who came into his office. He only raped some of them. Kennedy also did not hold back on tearing into Newsom a little more. Number three, in terms of Governor Newsom, he's flip-flopped a lot, Sean, on issues, but the governor's been very consistent on one thing: his antipathy toward the lives and feelings of ordinary Americans, including public safety. Governor Newsom his record shows this. He's the dictionary definition of weenie. He thinks cops are a bigger problem than criminals. He thinks if a cop has to shoot a criminal, it's automatically and always a cop's fault. But if a criminal shoots a cop, it's automatically and always the gun's fault. There's a link here to the Twitter post that has the video of that exchange. Suffice it to say that if you've been put on blast to this extent by Senator John Kennedy, who is usually gracious even when he's got you in his political sights, you might as well pick up the ball and go home because it's pretty much over, at least for the time being. LOL. That's again from Sister Tolja from North Carolina over at redstate.com. That pop, pop, pop sound might be gunfire, but it also might be liberals' heads exploding. Daily Caller had this story: RFK Jr. appoints fierce vaccine critic Dr. Robert Malone and 7 others to immunization committee. Now, I saw there were protests, like 400 and something of these vaccine committee members begging for their jobs back after they've been turned out on the street. Health and Human Services, HHS, Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appointed Dr. Robert Malone, an outspoken COVID-19 vaccine critic, to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. That's the CDC's ACIP, he announced in a Wednesday tweet. Malone, a trained virologist, was a key innovator of the mRNA technology that early COVID-19 vaccines were developed from. However, he became one of the first and most ardent critics of the vaccines and vaccine mandates, leading to Twitter suspending his account in 2021. I thank the Secretary for the honor of serving my country in this way and will do my best to serve with unbiased objectivity and rigor, Malone told the Daily Caller. Joining Malone on ACIP are Joseph R. Hiblin, MD, Martin Kulldorff, MD, PhD, Retsef Levi, PhD, Cody Meissner, MD, James Pagano, MD, Vicky Pebsworth, OP, PhD, RN, and Michael A. Ross, MD. Kennedy Jr. fired all 17 members of ACIP on Monday, citing a need for more transparency on the committee. ACIP makes recommendations to the CDC on routine vaccination schedules for children and adults. And just like that, someone who had been accused of not even being a real person on the internet or being dead is alive and actually working for the CDC in a capacity that will challenge Big Pharma and their control of this immunization pandemic that they engineered. It's going to be very interesting to see just how much dismantling we can do and how much information they're going to have access to about the damning results of COVID-19. I'm going to wrap up this week with an entry from bombthrower.com. Tribalism, neo-feudalism, and the vice of technology in the age of hyper-acceleration. This is by Mark E. Jeftovic. Ever heard of tachyosis? You're soaking in it. Quote, in the future, there will be only one occupation, managing one's wealth, and most people are going to be unemployed. It's been a minute since I last wrote anything here, owing to a combination of slightly heavier than usual travel schedule and, frankly, burnout after that last Canadian election. I've truly underestimated the gullibility of the Canadian public after being predictably on track for a massive pendulum swing to a conservative supermajority from 10 years of liberal policies demolishing Canada. The entire dynamic reversed and was nullified within a few short weeks by the entire elbows up mindfuck. The irony behind all this is that the public largely switched their vote for the candidate Donald Trump wanted to win because of their own Trump derangement syndrome. Watching it from the outside was demoralizing. Steve Bannon told me before the election that Trump's 51st state riffs were done on purpose to get the libs reelected, and Trump himself took a victory lap afterwards. Canadians were had. Why? Because the Americans want Alberta, and they think they'll get it through de facto economic or political integration within a few years after Wexit happens. We'll see how long this administration lasts. Nominally a minority, but functioning as a quasi-majority, and already introducing truly horrific legislation like Bill C-2, the Strong Borders Act, which is more of a mass surveillance and war on cash bill than anything else. The number of Canadians who now feel politically homeless is at an all-time high. The rapidly waning productive class of society watches unable to intervene as insular technocrats implement overtly destructive policies. 865,000 new immigrants admitted year to date in an economy that squeaked out 8,800 new jobs and seemed to be intentionally cultivating divisiveness and polarization. When I look back at my own writings and my overall theory that the era of nation-state primacy is coming to an end, that the single most impactful phenomenon driving the world today is the accelerating rate of change, it was naive of me to expect anything different. We're moving from the top-down, centralized model of a hierarchical industrial age and transitioning into an amorphous and mercurial, rapidly shifting network topology that blurs the lines between sovereigns and systems, crowns and corporations, that serves as a superconductor for data, information, and mimetic constructs, not to mention disinfo, bad news, and mass formation psychosis. Add to this mix AI, the third major technological disruption of this century after the Internet, decentralized non-state communications, and Bitcoin, decentralized non-state money. Now we have decentralized non-state intelligence, and I mean intelligence in a number of ways, including access to the sum total of human knowledge instantly and at effectively zero marginal cost. Each individual possessing the means, motive, and opportunity to create their own personal think tanks, advisory boards, and even spycraft-style intelligence services using OSINT and agentic AI that can act strategically and agentically on anybody's behalf. Servitor swarms, if you will. Every node, device, piece of software, and network-connected thing having the ability to access and act on information from everything else. There's a subcult of Bitcoin Maxis who actually welcome outcomes like the aforementioned Canadian election because they think having nations run by the most out-of-touch, behind-the-curve technocrats will hasten the collapse of the fiat money era and bring about a Bitcoin standard. They're awaiting a kind of monetary eschaton, and they are called accelerationists. I'm not an accelerationist, but you may have noticed that I've been writing a lot about this. But find the word itself being inadequate to the task. What's happening now is beyond acceleration. In physics, there is a derivative order, and their ascension forms a kind of kinematic spectrum. This derivative order is 0, position, where you are; first, velocity, the speed and direction; second, acceleration, the change in velocity; third, jerk, change in acceleration; fourth, snap, change in jerk; fifth, crackle, change in snap; sixth, pop, change in crackle. I've been trying to come up with a word that captures this accelerating acceleration that's a bit sexier than jerk, and this exponentially intensifying derivative expansion beyond snap, crackle, and pop. Oh, those nerd physicists. So far, I can really only make something up. Actually, it was the best ChatGPT could think of. Tachyosis. Tachy meaning fast, osis meaning condition, process, to wit. Tachyosis, a state of recursively compounding acceleration where systems evolve faster and they can stabilize, perception fragments, and causality begins to blur. Considered the experiential threshold of the kinematic continuum, civilizations in tachyosis cease to distinguish between signal and noise. They become pure velocity. This seems to fit the bill, and I like it because the word is reminiscent of psychosis, which is what a society is undergoing that induces at mass level. What tachyosis does to society. While we know what happens during hyperinflations, technological quantum leaps or breakdowns in the social contract as separate phenomenons, if you follow Ray Dalio, he'll tell you that the USA is following a template outlined in his own research, putting squarely on the path to civil war. Quote, that template led me to believe that there was a high chance of a convergent breakdown of the monetary order, the domestic political order, and the international geopolitical order. Unfortunately, events are transpiring consistent with that template. But with all due respect to Mr. Dali, his framework only covers 2 of the 3 drivers we're looking at here. It's missing compounding effects of technological overclocking, and there are no history books to describe all 3 of these forces hitting an inflection point at the same time and all over the world. As societal institutions break down, the economy enters a state of perpetual disruption. People start forming associations with like-minded individuals and families, both in their own communities and remotely. Tribes may overlap with geopolitical boundaries, but their center of gravity is what it stands for, not the political unit they may, for the moment, intersect with. Woke, MAGA, ANCAPs, BLM, Proud Boys, MS-13, Bitcoin, and Scientology are all examples of tribes now, regardless of where they started. Some with more staying power than others. They will all acquire more relevance and gravitas in their members' lives than their nation-state citizenship. Why? Because no nation-state can keep up with the process of tachyosis, while tribes are informed by it. To that end, there's a new tribe forming for politically homeless Canadians over at ready.ca. By this, I mean the effect of this technological hyperacceleration is having at both ends of your own personal lifespan. If you have kids under the age of 30, especially if they're under the age of 20, their path forward will be very different from all those who came before. But bluntly, they probably won't have jobs, much less careers. The time for each generation accumulating their own wealth and building personal fortunes will be, for most participants, over. Your kids, your grandchildren, and beyond, hold that thought, would do better to be raised in preparation for maintaining the wealth and managing any assets you leave to them. Anybody who doesn't inherit anything faces a real risk of being permanently priced out of the asset acquisition game in perpetuity, especially if they follow the path laid out in industrial age textbooks. Go to school, then university, then go find a job with a big company and parlay that into a series of mid-management posts that culminate in a career and payday. Most of those positions will have been automated away, and the majority of younger generations are looking at UBI and endless leisure, so long as they spend most of their time confined to a metaverse-connected pod soaked somewhere in a 15-minute city and taking up as little space and oxygen in the real world as possible. Meanwhile, if you have managed to amass assets and a non-negative net worth, be prepared to live longer, a lot longer. 150, 160 will probably be normal for anybody under 60 or so now. That's how fast biotech and soon nanotech is moving. A number of my peer group, mostly technology and business operators in their mid-50s to late 60s, are looking to take their chips off the table, sell the businesses they founded, and retire, assuming they'll need to clear enough money to last them another 20 or 30 years. That could be a huge mistake because there's a real possibility they'll find themselves facing the prospect of heading into their 90s and early 100s having outlived their retirement funds. The old model was, again put bluntly, die before your money runs out. Now it's not just about planning for 30 years post-retirement, plan for a century. Meanwhile, your kids won't have careers, neither will theirs, and you'll still probably be around to see your great and great-great-grandchildren be born into some post-bifurcation world. This is the neo-feudal aspect. Your fortune will have to be subdivided across each generation, like the fiefdoms of yore, and the only way to keep everybody living in the real world, instead of being tucked away in those pods, being intravenously fed liquid crickets and soy protein, will be to leave them with a vastly larger fortune than the one you thought was enough to get just you through retirement. I wish I had better news than this, because the world we're headed into, while technologically fantastic, will also be economically bleak for too many people. It's not fair, it's not egalitarian, and there's no stopping it, short of a Tower of Babel 2.0 type event, which will be a total buzzkill in even less predictable ways, and less preferable ways. I've called this scenario the Great Bifurcation, where the world's middle class disintegrates, and we head into a hellscape of mind-boggling wealth disparity. Lately, I've come to suspect that this will play out beyond the economic sphere and also occur at the level of mental abstraction. And by this, I don't mean the haves will have brain chips and poors won't. Probably the other way around, if anything, but that underclass will be operating at a cognitive disadvantage that resembles a different species entirely. More on that in the next piece. Jump on the Bomb Thrower mailing list to catch that when it drops. And that's Mark E. Jeftovic. A bit of scary stuff there. I mean, if you buy into it. I think some of it is about preparation. I think some of it may be a little bit lighter. Should we be preparing? I think intergenerational wealth is still the absolute best way to leave our families what they need for the future. And right now in the United States, people who have land really should keep it. And maybe if they don't have land, they should get it, because that seems to be a good bet. When you have a place of your own, you have a bit of control. When you're at the mercy of someone else's locale and what they want to charge you, then you're kind of not in control. So I think that, I'm not really a big fan of banking on things like gold. These are all things that have arbitrary numerical values. What I look for are the things that you can eat, the things that you can use, the things that you can build, the things you can grow, the things that will allow you to control your life and not be at somebody else's whim. If we want to be free from being slaves, then we have to do it ourselves, and we have to empower ourselves to be independent. I want you to have a good week. Happy Father's Day again to all those fathers out there. Remember who you are. Remember you're an example. And remember to tune in again next week for another episode of Atomic Biscuits. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as Bitchute, Rumble, D-Live and Odysee. Check out LastScoutRadio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.